Chapter 55. Settling in. Summary. They're finally out in space. Time to get used to their new home away from home. The gang had to get used to new routines and situations quite a few times over the last 5 months. First, it was being on the Glockberry ship. Then, it was being in the warehouse on the Trellan ship. Then, living on Oxius. Now, they had to get used to living on their ship. If they hadn't spent so much time living mere centimeters apart, the enclosed living space might have had them stepping on each other's toes more. As it was, they transitioned smoothly to ship life. After waking up that first morning on the ship, it was quickly decided that beds were overrated, and they'd continue to sleep in the sitting area every night. It also made sense to be closer to the controls, so they could take over if anything snuck up on them while they slept. The decision left them with 2 unused rooms. Immediately, Mei called dibs on one of them as a lab. No one decided to fight her on this. Not only did they not want Mei inventing in the main room of the ship, the explosions would very much be a hazard. But they needed a space to maintain equipment like weapons and suits. So it was agreed that Mei, Denki, and Izuku would set up their own little lab on the ship, as long as they made sure there was enough space for Mina and the siblings to come and work on their costumes from time to time. The other room was also quickly decided upon. This time, Katsuki was the one to suggest, demand, that they transform the room into a mini gym. For the most part, they would be confined to the ship, which didn't give them a lot of space to keep up fitness. While they wouldn't be able to train their quirks too well, they would be able to train their bodies. The teens needed to make sure they stayed fit, even in space. They couldn't exactly get the necessary equipment and materials right now. They'd have to land somewhere at some point to stock up on supplies so they could buy whatever they needed. In the meanwhile, they could get a start disassembling the beds. The frames were metal, and thanks to Ochako's background in construction, she knew a couple tricks to repurpose them into the framework for the lab counters. So, the next morning, after Mei pulled a freaking blowtorch out of the ground, she literally picked up one of the floor panels and emerged with an entire blowtorch, which utterly terrified everyone but Izuku and Denki. Who do you think suggested storing equipment there in the first place? Everyone got to work. Ochako wiped the sweat off her forehead after she finished cutting through the next bunk bed. She was definitely glad to see them go. Sleeping in a bed was something she never wanted to do again. This bed was the last one in the new lab that needed to be broken down into components. It was slow going with only 2 torches. Ochako still wasn't sure where the second one came from. But they were getting there. Mei cackled as she cut another beam to the correct length. She was, evidently, very excited about making her own lab. Izuku was also beaming his sunshine smile as he laid out the cut pieces into the frames. Ochako wasn't sure why, because he didn't have anything to weld them with. Just then, Izuku touched an unseen panel on the wall, and it popped out, revealing a welding torch. "What the fuck?" Katsuki said, baffled. He was leaning in the doorway, watching them work, which was fair, given he just put together a snack for them to snack on. "How many things do you gremlins have squirreled away in there?" "Well," Izuku started, "there isn't much space on the ship, so we had to get creative. Pretty much everything has a secret panel for storage." Just then, Denki popped up in the doorway. "That's not even the weirdest thing in the walls." He smirked. "Want to see our children?" He gestured back towards the main room with finger guns. "There." "What?" Ochako didn't know what to expect as they made their way to the main room. Mina and Fastel were repairing the tear in Mina's costume. Some mix between stitching and melding the special fibers back together to create a seal on the spacesuit. On the kitchen counter, while Pyerpa messaged his friends from Oxius on his tablet. At the group's entrance, they turned to look at Denki as he walked over to the little space between control desks at the front of the ship. He pressed on the empty wall either side, and with a near-silent whoosh, 2 little slots near the floor opened. For a moment, there was nothing. But then, 2 recognizable forms emerged.
"Why the ever-loving fuck are there roombas in our walls?"
Katsuki demanded, turning around to stare at the inventing squad, which meant he didn't notice when one of said roombas began to approach him. Ochako certainly wasn't going to say anything, and it seemed like the others were in silent agreement, as they eyed the stalking Roomba with mirth. In the middle of a rant on how weird they all were, Katsuki let out a high-pitched yelp and fell down.
"What the fuck? It tased me!"
Laughter broke out from all the Terrans. Denki quickly sunk to the floor, catching his stomach from the sheer intensity of cackling.
"Just be glad it wasn't stabby,"
he managed out through gasps.
"He goes for the tendons."
Ochako turned her gaze back to the Roomba slots, where even more robots had emerged. There was, indeed, a Roomba with a knife attached to it. Joining it was a Roomba with many small knives attached 360 degrees around it, a Roomba with a claw grabber, and a Roomba with googly eyes. It's a shame we have to keep the others in storage for now. They're a little too dangerous for the ship, but once we get to Earth, they'll get to roam free in the support lab, Izuku said with a wistful sigh.
"More dangerous?"
Ochako squeaked.
"Those 2 have knives attached to them."
Izuku looked her dead in the eyes and started listing various weapons. Gun, laser, sword, trebuchet, flamethrower, chainsaw. Ochako wasn't sure what that was about until he said, "These are all things we've attached to Roombas. There's also Flappy, but it's a concussion waiting to happen in such a small space." Pyrepa chirped, tilting his head to the side. "What is a Roomba?" "And why does it involve so many weapons?" Fastel followed up, tail flicking and eyes narrowing at the little Roombas as they bumped into walls. Kaminari let out an excited gasp.
"Roombas are little dumb vacuums. They can't tell something's in front of them until they run into it. They kind of just roll around bumping into walls until the floor is clean. Because the little guys just go around doing their own thing, ancient Terrans tape knives to the front of them for the meme. It's still a tradition that modern meme historians like myself uphold to this day." Pyrepa and Fastel didn't look like they understood, but that was to be expected. Memes were difficult to understand for outsiders. Ochako knew it took her a while to understand 2000s memes when Kaminari introduced them to the class. It really was a shame meme culture hadn't survived the dawn of quirks. According to Kaminari, it was the greatest loss humanity had ever faced. "Terrans are so violent," Fastel muttered with a weary smile, keeping a watchful eye on the armed Roombas as they were corralled back into the wall slots. "That's enough of those babies for now," Mei said, waving her blowtorch around. "Time to build the lab so we can make them more siblings!" Ah, yes. Back to their task for the day. If everything went to plan, they'd be able to finish it before the end of the day cycle. Speaking of day cycle, now that they were on the ship, they could set it to however long they wanted. For now, they transitioned to 18-hour days to get the siblings back up to their planet's regular rotation cycle. Once they were safe and sound back home, they'd finally get back to 24-hour cycles. Or, Ochako supposed, whatever they found worked for them. They were bound by the rotation of celestial bodies no longer.
Ochako couldn't help but giggle at the thought as she got back to work. It was going to be a long day of manual labor, but she was glad to be able to spend it with her family. It made her feel closer to her parents back on Earth, despite the distance. "Ouch!" Izuku hissed, sticking his throbbing finger into his mouth. Apparently, The metal was still hot from soldering into place. On the bright side, they'd almost finished their framework for their new lab. Izuku was so excited to have a space for inventing on their journey back. He'd definitely been spoiled by Mei's lab, but now they get to make their own. It wouldn't be anything fancy, but it would be theirs. Still, there's something else lurking under all of his excitement. All for one, aka his father. After first Yoshi's shattering reveal, the other vestiges explained what actually happened. The people back at home were worried about them. They'd figured out a way to contact them with One for All, even at such a distance. Unfortunately, they needed All for One's help for this, which would have been distressing in its own right, even without the reveal. Izuku still doesn't know what to think about everything. He loved his father. Before he left, Izuku only had happy memories of the man, even when he wasn't around anymore. Izuku never blamed his father for giving up on him. But apparently, he hadn't given up on him. He'd just been severely lacking a face. The knowledge that his father wanted to be in his life warmed a damaged corner of his soul. But that was directly contrasted with the part of his brain that screamed that his father was a villain. An ancient villain who had committed many terrible crimes. Sure, Izuku didn't know about anything other than killing One for All users, punching some of All Might's organs out, and allowing Nomu to be created, but those were pretty horrible. Oh, and he was in charge of the League, the group that had attacked and hurt his class, the group that had kidnapped Kachon, the group that plagued his class's nightmares for months. Izuku was related to someone who hurt the people he cared about so much. He knew his friends cared about him. He knew he was thinking completely irrationally, but a small part of him couldn't help but whisper, "They'll hate you for it." Which was dumb. It was his father who he hadn't even known was a villain until now, who did all that. One he hadn't seen in years. But he had the blood of a villain running through his veins. Then again, Todoroki had Endeavor's blood, and he wasn't a flaming pile of garbage. Still, he didn't know what to think about this. He would tell the others soon, but Izuku needed some time to work through this on his own. He would have to face his father before long. The vestiges didn't exactly know when they try to contact them again, but it could be any day now. The only caveat seemed to be that Izuku had to be asleep for them to bring him into the void. So he had until then to sort out his feelings and talk to the others. Because even if he wasn't eager to tell them about his father, they needed to know that there was a way for him to contact Earth. It was late when the 8 of them settled down to eat dinner. They had an intensive day of work and were excited to dig into Katsuki's cooking. "Who thought alien food would taste so good?" Denki said as he went in for seconds. "I always imagined it would be tasteless goo for some reason." "I have to say I'm surprised that the same things taste so good to so many species," Izuku observed. "Well, except for spicy food," Mina grinned, elbowing Katsuki. "I haven't seen anything like pineapple yet either. Do you think that's a similar situation?" Denki pouted. What's pineapple?" Pyerpa asked, tilting their head to the side. You'd think that the Ossiers would have learned to stop questioning the Terrans by now. "It's a fruit that's prickly on the outside, and the flesh inside is acidic. It's my favorite fruit because it's the only one that can eat you back," Dinky chirped. From the horrified looks on the siblings' faces, it was a pretty safe bet that anything pineapple-like would be just as difficult to obtain as spicy food. "I just can't get over how good your cooking is," Ochako gushed. You've gotten so much better since you worked with Ayalen? The girl stilled. We forgot to send a picture of the plant to Ayalen yesterday.
Shit, Katsuki muttered. Go grab it, Roundface.
Ochako hurried out of her seat and to where the plant was perched, and Izuku grabbed the tablet to set it on the counter where they were eating. The plant was settled in the middle of the surface, Katsuki hissing to make sure Ochako didn't let it touch the food. They were all squeezed into frame as Izuku set the timer. This time, keeping in mind the lack of shutter sound. Katsuki grabbed the device after the photo was taken.
At least everybody's looking into the camera this time.
The photo was sent along, and the blonde ushered everyone back to their meals, and a few minutes later, they heard a little notification ding. Fastel picked up the device, translating the message for the Terrans.
Glad you're doing well. The town misses you already. I know you're all probably worried, but everything is fine here. The Trellin were taken into custody with no issues, and most of the minor damage has been fixed. You kids take care of yourselves. Keep up the cooking, Katsuki.
Everyone, even the resident angry blonde, had a small smile on their face by the end of the message. They went to bed that night with full bellies and full hearts.